I would just say that, for people to know the way in which to pronounce Dahomey, because it's like
Dahomey.
people
Yo,
say
because
this.
I've been fucking that up this whole time, right? So it's like
And I was
Dahomey.
like, do I correct him? But I was like, I can't, I don't want to get cussed out by my family to be like, you didn't correct him. Like, okay. It came at the end. Yes.
Okay. Oh, it came at the end, but I'm gonna put this at the beginning, so it'll be the
Okay,
intro to the
perfect.
entire podcast. So the whole time
Okay.
I say Dahomey wrong,
Wrong.
remember it this way.
Yes, yeah.
This is a Now Magazine podcast.
Hello and welcome to Now What? I'm Reddy Anson Play, acting editor at Now Magazine and your host for this podcast. So here we are with one last TIFF podcast. This time we're speaking about The Woman King. That's the movie hitting theaters this weekend with Viola Davis playing the leader of a fierce female army from the kingdom of Dahomey. And the woman you heard correcting my pronunciation of Dahomey was Esie Mensah. Esie is a Toronto-based dancer, choreographer, teacher, director, and public speaker. And we're talking to Esie about the complicated history behind The Woman King, which involves supplying the transatlantic slave trade. And we're talking about how the movie reframes that narrative to give you an exciting action movie epic with some of the coolest stars on the planet. So here is that conversation. So hi, Esie. How's it
Hi.
going? So we just watched this movie finally last night, The Woman King. And I want to jump into like my concerns that I initially had before I even watched this movie, because you remember this. So, back when I was getting my kind of TIFF previews ready, I go start writing about The Woman King as this movie that we're all excited about. But then I read the history behind it. So The Woman King is about this army called the Agoji, these female warriors fighting on behalf of the kingdom of Dahomey. It's the kingdom of Dahomey's squadron. What I found out when I just did a Wikipedia search, it's a basic history, is that the kingdom of Dahomey was built on slavery, on the slave trade, right? The Atlantic slave trade, capturing, basically raiding neighboring African countries and villages and stuff, enslaving the people of those villages and selling them on the transatlantic slave trade. And also, some of the histories have like really brutal details about them, like breaking off the jaws of people who are useless to the slave trades and stuff. So it's the stuff that I'm like, whoa, hold on a second, these are the heroes of this movie. That was my first impression. Of course, then we had then we watched the movie, but initially, do you want to like engage right there, like when you hear that part of it, or like
Yeah. And I think the thing that I personally really loved about this movie was that I ended and I was like, oh wow, this is the first time we've seen a movie about slavery that also showcases the African perspective. Like every time we think about slavery, it starts on the slave ship, and I hate slave movies. Like it doesn't help me in my life at all. But it's something about in terms of where it was like either you are the hunted or you are the hunter. And if you don't want to be the hunted, then you have to make sure that you are in doing everything you can possible to be the hunter. And so placing themselves into that space, obviously in protection of their people, like that first raid and of that Oyo tribe was because they took their people. So it's like what you were willing to do to defend your own was a huge thing. And obviously it's like when you think about when the Agoje tribe was on the auction block, we'll make sure we'll sell them, we'll get top dollar for them because they know that they can fight and they know that they'll be able to work. Essentially, it's going to take time to break them. But imagine even for her when she was like, you can't let them see that my arm is broken, because then essentially it's like you would be useless to them. And I don't think, and I think the big thing with the slave trade, I can't necessarily say like the Africans that sold them, anyone of their own, whether they were of their own tribe or neighboring tribes, I don't know if they knew what they were setting them up for. I don't know what they knew with the slave ships, because if you're exiting on boats, but those boats are taking to a massive ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, they're not seeing that. They're not seeing the conditions that people are going to be going to, what life was going to be like once they landed in the Americas. Like there's so much that of that story that they didn't know. They're just like, either I'm going to be the hunted or the hunter, and I'm going to opt out to be the hunter. And obviously that comes with a price, because then you're gaining financial success from that. But then, and I appreciated with Viola, it was just like, but at what cost? We can't just be protecting our own. We have to protect everyone.
Yeah. And, you know, to that, I'll say, like, first of all, when I made my initial kind of comments on Twitter, I didn't even know that the movie was actually going to tackle that, right? Because you look at the trailers, it's like, look at this, you know, like post-Black Panther fierce female squadron. Let's celebrate the strength, which is like, you know, we were all down, you know, I was down for and stuff. And then I saw that and I was like, oh shit. So I didn't know that the movie would actually tackle that. I didn't know the movie was actually going to be about Viola Davis's character Naniska being like the leader of the Goji, and being the one that says, you know what, we should, like, you know, be basically pushing her kingdom to end slavery and move into the palm oil business, right? And so I didn't know the movie was gonna take that route to actually like acknowledge it. At the same time, I mean, the history this movie presents is not the history that we see in the books, right? It's like, so in the books, it's like, apparently it's the British that had to force Dahomey, the kingdom of Dahomey, to abandon the slave trade, right? They imposed blockades on their slave trade and all that stuff, right? So I mean, there's just a few thoughts on that already. Like one of my thoughts on this is like, okay, well, this is an alternative history, but then again, history books are written by the white gays, the colonizers.
Exactly. So it's already misconstrued.
Yeah. So like, I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess that's why I feel like it is fair then for us to have this alternate version and this alternative like kind of take on what could have went down. Maybe, but then at the same time, you still can't help but feel like this is also a rose-colored lens that they are rewriting this history with, right? Like they don't really project any of the flaws on these women warriors.
Yeah. And I think, you know, even when thinking about that in terms of like, you know, the history, I think that we have to reimagine in terms of like, what were those conversations like? You know, I think, you know, the African American perspective was like, yep, they sold us. They're living a good life because they got a chance to stay on the continent. And I'm here and my ancestors were slaves for the last 400 years. Like, because there's a big divide, obviously, between the African Americans and the Africans in terms of like, well, you know, my history, like I know where I'm from. I like the words that they were speaking were of Voodoo culture, which is also a part of Ewe culture, which is a neighboring tribe. And like Dahomey was names in which I heard growing up. So it was very surreal being in like watching it and being like, no, that's like Benin, Togo, Ghana are all neighboring countries. And before you had colonial borders, you existed in terms of tribe. So just in thinking about like the choice of being able to say, okay, yes, we did what we needed to do, but we are also going to push the narrative of the fact that, yeah, there were Africans that fought for that change. There were Africans that fought to shift the narrative in terms of like, yes, we can make this money, because at the end of the day, once the slave trade ended, they just started looting for gold and for all of the other resources that we had. So in their mind, they're like, the biggest capital is human capital. But at some point in time, that human capital shifted into minerals. And then that's basically, you know, was the continual up until this day, raping of African resources for the betterment of everybody else's wealth except for Africa's. You know, so I think that the thought of being able to shift it, but it's just the fact that like, but if your buyer's not willing, you know, the general says it, if the buyer or the king says it, if the buyer's not going to you know, essentially move towards a space of resources versus humans, then you're obsolete. You're not going to be able to survive, because people have to be willing to buy what you're selling to them. And you have to be able to position it in a way to say that, yes, this palm oil is just as valuable as that human life. I think like this particular film, I feel opens up a massive conversation that has not happened amongst those of the Afro diaspora, those, you know, on the outside looking in, because we've only seen slavery through a colonial lens. Like, you know, was it really the British that ended the slave trade? Did they realize, wake up one day and be like, maybe I don't want to sell Black people anymore. Maybe we should change this. I don't think that happened. I think that, as most things, as with any company, something affects your dollar, and you have to now adapt when it hits your pocket. You're not adapting because of moral rights. You're adapting because financially there's something that is either enticing you more, or you realize that this is not going to be a viable thing for the next, 100+ years.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that the British decided to end the slave trade when they lost control of the Americas. It's like,
we can't keep bringing more Black people here.
Yeah. It's like, I mean, we got all the resources we need on that thing, and that's when we decided to end it and stuff like that, right? So that's the thing. But then, okay, so like, here's the thing though. So like, one last more thing is like, I often criticize kind of the white savior narratives. You know how often we see like, movies. I mean, of course, I love a movie like Schindler's List, right? But Schindler's List was about the good German who decided to do something that was outside of the rest of the Nazi, like, who decided to defy the Nazi orders and stuff like that. And we often see those narratives where it's like the narrative comes from the perspective of someone who is part of the oppressor, but that was one of the good ones. And sometimes those are actually just fictionalized. I mean, and you saw it even in a movie like Hidden Figures, where it's like, oh, look at Kevin Costner's character. He was one of the good ones who helped break down the washroom sign and some shit like that, right? Like, which never happened. Yeah. So I mean, but then by that same criticism, then we could look at in terms of the Kingdom of Dahomey in this movie, in The Women King, because it's like they are giving us that exceptional, like, this was these are warriors who enslaved their own people, but here's these exceptional characters that we're going to make up so that we could root for them. So do you feel like does that weigh on you? Like, is that something you have to like contemplate a process or something, or you're just grateful for the alternative perspective on it?
I think it is necessary. Like, I'm not going to look at the story and be like, oh yes, they got everything right, or they what they presented to me was completely accurate. I don't want to necessarily believe that, because like even in like the interview that they had done for TIFF for Taking Up Space, they only mentioned that this film was shot in South Africa. But then, and there hasn't been any rhetoric of the fact like no, this Dahomey is in Benin. This is in West Africa. Like, let's just give context in terms of geography, because it's like we favor certain African countries over the other, and it's just like to present this as another alternative to the West African narrative, and how that plays out, like the religion and the spirituality. Obviously the movement, some of it was reminiscent of it, but also some of it was reminiscent of the place that they shot, which was South Africa. And so it's like the taking, and it's also happened in Black Panther, the taking of other cultures to kind of help you to formulate your own story. It has its pluses and its minuses, because even then that's also an act of colonization, of being able to kind of pick and choose a la carte what it is that you want to be able to say. But I think, overall with this particular story, it challenges. I think that fundamentally a lot of people are going to be challenged by this, because they've never been presented with another story. They've never been presented with another option for them to be able to discuss, like even seeing the spiritual practice of voodoo, also Vodun, on screen, and not thinking about Africans only in context of Christianity, because there's I think, the capita of churches even in Ghana alone is massive, the way that the effects of colonialism on the continent, we always think about the effects in terms of North Americans, but we're also not thinking about what remained for the people that stayed. And so even fundamentally, there'll be a lot of Africans that'll look at this and have to think about their own spiritual practices, because it's like what we were given and what we adopt today is not necessarily our own, because there's not a lot of people that believe in these. They think it's of the devil. They think it's a negative thing. So to me, the fullness in terms of the respect of how they cared for the spirit and the being, for the people that transition, for the people that were taken. There was still a spiritual practice that rooted that particular tribe. And I think that those are things that rarely get highlighted in this particular way, in this particular film, to say that like we can't save everybody's soul, but we're going to try to commit the souls that we're taking. We're going to honor them and ensure that they can always be remembered in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and so I gotta tell you, like, I mean, everything you're describing is why I was totally like, I want to subscribe to this movie. Like I want to subscribe to this vision. I mean, so we'll just get right into it. I was very entertained by this movie. I enjoyed it. I was just like the cheer. We were both in the same theater. The cheering that was going on when that was you. That was all
me
you,
in the back.
Like, yeah. Like it was great. Like, I mean, and so we'll talk about like, I mean, those details I loved, like what you said, like learning those cultural details, the costumes.
Yeah.
Gorgeous costume.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. And like and just the designs of Viola's haircut, which I think you kind of have a similar haircut right now.
It's like the mohawk. Yes. I was like, this is me.
Yeah.
I am her.
So but yeah, like, I mean, let's talk. I mean, I think the first thing, I mean, I think the one thing that I mean that really got me into this movie is just that the chemistry between this cast.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about this cast. I mean, it's Viola Davis. I mean, in a way, Viola Davis's character is kind of on her own. She's like kind of the what is it, the stoic leader who has all this trauma that she's processing, and she's kind of trying to be the right role model for these characters. But then it's like, then you get so much fun out of Lashana Lynch playing instead of this veteran warrior with this like great sense of humor, and then like who like really like who's affectionately hard on Thuso Mbedu. How do I say her name? Thuso Mbedu?
Yeah. Thuso Mbedu, I think.
Who I love from the Underground Railroad. She was absolutely incredible. I got to talk to her about the Underground Railroad, and she was just such a charming person. But it's like, and she's just such an incredible actress, and it was so fun to see her take on, Underground Railroad. That's a role where, yes, she does get to show her strength, but it is a lot of suffering in that movie. Here, you just see her kick ass and have fun and be romantic and stuff like that. So, but yeah, talk to me about like, what first, I mean, I guess, just that cast, the engagement, like, how they represented.
Yeah, like to me, it was beautiful to see like melanated Black woman on stage, like in this film, and just like the little girl in me is just screaming, over and over and over again, like all of the different characters, all of who they represented, like Sheila, almost as like the spiritualist of the space, in terms of how she cares for Viola, and just again the spiritual practices that you see for Thuso. Like Thuso is incredible. Like, to me, I'm just like, she's gonna break out and she's gonna go so far and wide. And it just like the strength, the determination that she was able to show. Like, there was a sisterhood, like even watching like interviews and them being like, yeah, Gina, the director, was like a part of the training. I'm like, when do you ever hear that? Like, it's like, no, you go do it. And I'm going to tell you what I want in terms of the picture. But she herself went through that physical, transformation that everybody went through. Like, Viola's like, the woman's almost going to be 60 in a couple years. Like, I was like, like the physicalness, but then at the same time, it's just like, this is who we are. This is how strong we are. Like and obviously it's like so many societies on the continent are patriarchal societies. So to have this all woman army, basically coming to say that we are going to represent our people in this way, and the sisterhood, like the family dynamic that was really in terms of the care and how they cared for each other, and the memories of the scars, and it's just like, it was so beautiful to see how they were able to cultivate this. And you can tell that it was something that was both off and on screen. Like, you can tell that this, like, whenever they have something, they can call Viola and have her as a mother figure. And how Viola, it almost felt like it was a sum up of her career, like in many ways, in terms of like things that she's had to push up against. Like, I'm getting ready for a talk, and I was reading up on her thoughts on shadeism, colorism, for those that know it by a different name, and what happened to her when she got get away with murder. You know, how do I get away with murder? And how people in our own community didn't think that she was pretty enough for that role, you know, as a dark-skinned woman, you know. And then it's and what that meant for her, and her taking off her wig on that thing. Like, there was so much of a growth and transformation of her to be able to stand up, and like seeing that through her character also in this film was just phenomenal. And you know, and recognizing that the ideals of how we've done things, we are never in a position to always take them as rule. Like, we can continue to change them. And like, that to me was a consistent transformation that you saw in so many of the characters, like things that they believed in, and how that continued to change in them as they were like, oh, this was what I believed, and now you're telling me a new truth. Okay, I'm going to be in conflict, but I'm going to take up this new truth that you're giving me, because this is actually how I need to see it, you know. And I think that it's beautiful. It's beautiful to see these women together, like Angelique Kidjo, who's a famous singer, was also in the movie. Like, I was just like,
Who did
it
she
was
play?
like, she was one of the elders of the council for the king, and but she's a famous singer. So it's just like, to see, you know, her in this film was what to me was like a beautiful cherry on top of just like, yeah, we get to honor our elders, like our elders that like, she's probably like the most she's probably won the most Grammys as an African artist. Like, she's cleaning up every year. But she's phenomenal. She's a phenomenal artist and a phenomenal voice. And so it's beautiful to kind of hear, to see, you know, just how far, deep, and wide that they were able to getting actors from the continent, getting actors from North America, you know. I think that diversity adds something different, because again, geography, if you're born in America versus if you're born somewhere on the continent, if you're first generation born in Europe, you know, or born in Canada, like, all of our experiences are different. All of our understanding of our history is different. And so that can only enrich the diversity of that cast, and for telling such a hard story. I think that you needed all of those. You needed that mix of people to be able to tell the story.
You know, so I want to add, like, so beautifully said, and I want to add a couple things. Like, first of all, you mentioned Sheila in the cast, right? So Sheila is a very tall woman who was also in the Underground Railroad. It's actually funny because she played Thuso Mbedu's character's mother in the Underground Railroad, and here she is as an elder figure in this group of warriors. The other thing you mentioned is, like, you know, just Gina being among this cast, being among this girl group, and you could feel that, where Gina as a director is getting these performances, creating this camaraderie with the cast. Because and the one performance, I mean, I mentioned Lashana Lynch earlier, and I mean, I'm going to hone in on that because, you know, Lashana Lynch was kind of being positioned as this great new Black female lead because of her appearance in her supporting role in Captain Marvel, and her supporting role in the Bond movie, where she's the new 007 in the Bond movie. And while it's like positioned as this, oh, amazing Black woman 007, I didn't feel that performance from Lashana. I feel like that's a performance of posturing. Whereas this is a performance, this is a real deal meaty performance, and you know, she connected with this character, she connected with her fellow castmates. You could feel like the real Lashana Lynch kind of jumped out in this movie to me, and that was what I was like, holy shit, like, this is what happens when you get like someone that actually respects her for a talent, as opposed to some kind of symbolic, you know, token sort of, you know.
The first Black woman of Bond. Yeah, holding those titles are it's a consolation prize, guys. It's not a medal, it's not a badge of honor. You know, and it's true. Like, she was so, like, the mannerisms, like, there's moments that I started laughing, because it's like the thing, she pelts her lips as she's talking about somebody. I was like, oh, that's such an African thing to do. And I'm like the mannerisms of how, again, it was like a harshness. It's a tough love, but it's still love, you know. And it was she to me, it's like she was so wonderful. She was so wonderful to watch. And I was actually like, oh, she's getting so much screen time. But I was just like, and then when she wasn't there, I was like, I miss her. Like, I miss I was like, where are you? I need the jokes. I need the laughter. I need how you care in this piece, you know, as an elder, as a warrior. Like, she came alive. And I think she also said that in a few interviews that I watched, where it's just like, that ability to come into a space where you don't have to posture, you don't have to put on, where you can actually just be. Like all of them said it, to be in a space where you can just be and exist. And I don't have to worry, I don't have to fight with hair and makeup about my hair, about why I want my hair this way for this character. And sorry, ma'am, that shade is not is too light for me. And I don't know if this is gonna fit. Like you can tell that it was like you were cared for from the minute you came onto this until the minute you guys wrapped. And you can see it. You can see it, and you could see it in there. Like, to me, it's like when you're cared for that much, it reflects in the performance.
Yeah.
And I see all of the women go above and beyond to be able to really convey the message that they feel inside of them. When you give people space to bring their brilliance and you support them in that journey, they can only be spectacular. And that's exactly, what these women was. Like Thusu, like, if she's it's so funny watching her. I was like, you're so stubborn. I was like, bro, why you're so stubborn? But then at the same time, I'm like, no, we needed that. We needed you to fight and be sure of yourself and be wrong and then be right. And it just, it was like the cast, like it was beautifully, beautifully, beautifully cast.
Yeah. And also, I mean, again, like, I mean, we've said this a few times, how funny they are. Yeah. And that's also rare, in a story about slavery.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, you know what I mean? Like that's where you got this like alternative perspective where you can find like kind of joys and stuff in these kind of tellings where it's like it is more multi-dimensional in that way.
Yeah. And I think it's just like the idea of like humor is a beautiful way to tell hard stories. Using humor is a beautiful way to tell hard stories or to tell hard truths, and I think that is part that makes it so exciting, because it's just like the one thing that I did not expect to do was laugh in this film. And there were multiple points where I was laughing, multiple points where I was like, whoa, and it's just like the silent moments. Those are to me, it's like, it's a cultural thing. Those silent moments are such a cultural thing that holds so much weight, that I was like, this is to me, I'm like, the screen, the writer of this piece, like, kudos to you, because, and the way that the actors were able to push the text further by really analyzing these groups of people, really made them whole people. You felt them as whole people, as opposed to like, oh, you're just a character that I need to follow. And it's like, oh, I feel you as a whole person when you're in that.
Before we wrap this up, I gotta ask you, I'd be fooled not to ask you what you thought of, like, in more detail, the physicality, not just the fighting, but the dancing, and also the fighting that looks like dancing. I think you are the one that could speak on this.
And it's awesome too, because I met the choreographer yesterday, doing a class in the city. So as soon as I left the film, I went over because my friend was hosting her. One of my dancers was hosting her for a class up in the West End. So as soon as I left, I cut the tail end. Got a chance to just jam with her and dance with her for a little bit, and ended up in conversation. And so she's so wonderful. It's like, to celebrate, Zoe is her name, and just to celebrate her. And I think her co-choreographer was a gentleman named Eugene. I might be getting that wrong, but the thing is, it's like I grew up doing traditional dances from Ghana. And there were dances that were they were synonymous with life. So there's a war dance, called a chabako, which was like, they had we had a horse tail that we danced with, but I'm sure that horse tail at some point in time was a machete of some sort that they probably had in battle. So the way that we dance was to get people ready for battle. So to me, it was beautiful to see the movement, to see how the movement really lent, where it felt like dancing, but then it also felt like battle. It also felt like war, and how the movement really, to me, kind of carried us throughout the piece in many ways, where there was the movement for celebration, but then there was also movement in preparation for battle. Like you saw those two, and it was wonderful. Even like the last, I don't want to give too much away, but like, where we end off, again in celebration of all that was sacrificed. It to me, it just showcases again who we are. Like there is a celebration for your funeral, there is a celebration for your birth, there is a celebration for your coming of age. There's celebrations at many points in time. And so that again was a cultural fabric that was placed into this piece so beautifully, to be able to again show how the drum and the dance and the battle and the livelihood of these people are again all intertwined into the same fabric. So, kudos to Zoe and her team. Born, she's from South Africa. I had heard rumors. I was like, oh, she's from LA. She's like, no. As soon as this tour is done, I'm going back to South Africa. And I was like, I really hope that she gets her visa. I hope that she gets her papers, because I hope that she gets to work, because we need more African voices in these spaces, in these commercial spaces, as we're getting ready to tell these stories. It's necessary that we get to see the movement reflect the times. And even though she's from South Africa and the stories in West Africa, she tried to do her due diligence to bring that movement forward. And, as a choreographer, you're in a constant, love battle with your director of like, this is what I want to do. And then the director's like, no, or the actors are like, hell no. This is too complicated. So it's like what you're able to arrive at is really like, version 25 or version 256 in terms of like of where we wanted to be and then where we end up. But even where they ended up was still really, really, really beautiful. Everybody needs to see it. Everybody needs to see it. And I look forward to all of the other films, hopefully one day, including my own, that will be an answer to what they started.
So that's it for this episode and potentially for the Now What podcast. If you've been following along, you know that Now has seen better days and the staff is about ready to pack it in. So please keep following our writers and reading our stuff, and hopefully you'll hear from us soon. Bye now.